The Marquis of Schwarlen and Rosiana are eating dinner at the table. The man cut into the meat, wondering to his named daughter if it was true that her pet hadn't been eating at all lately. This made the girl a little tense, but she didn't give any sign of it, continuing with her meal. Marquis liked this and explained that he was going to tame it as soon as possible and start spending more time with the girl. Rosiana smiles genuinely, letting Schwarlen know that she's not offended. Oh, and besides, continues to be well-behaved. Wasting no time, the girl clarifies if she can visit her pet today. The Marquise, it seemed, at first was not particularly happy about the idea, but suddenly smiled, agreeing with his daughter. That was the end of their conversation. Deep in the night, the girl makes her way into the dungeon. From the darkness, frightened yellow eyes stare at her, but she is not afraid of them. Even when a broken plate is found underfoot, Rosiana calmly asks her captor if it is true that her father put something in the boy's food. Once Kadim realized it was Rosiana and not the Marquise's underlings, he became calmer. Or maybe he was also calmed by the caring voice of the girl, who grumbled a little about the fact that she had told the Marquis more than once about the uselessness of medicine. Rosiana handed the prisoner a bowl of food, not forgetting to mention that it was really clean and that no one had put anything in it. Kadim looks at the bowl of food with skepticism. He really does want to try it, but distrust was taking over. Both children were silent for a while. Rosiana waited for the captive to take the food, while he waited for an insight that would help him understand the truth of the girl's intentions. Kadim can't trust her so easily, so the girl takes one of the rolls and takes a bite of it. Afterward, Rosiana thought that the boy just doesn't understand and shows him that it should be put in his mouth. The captive then realizes that they want to help him and happily takes the food. Rosiana asks him to take his time so that the food will digest better. Kadim Gardia is a slave from Cantina. Marquis Schwarlen bought him at an auction to protect Rosiana. His peculiarity was that he had a mixture of the blood of people from this tribe and savage blood. The girl opens the jar of salve, contemplating the fact that it would have been many times better if she had known about all of this sooner. But she realizes pretty quickly that she's been reborn. According to the plot, Rosiana was to be Schwarlen's main puppet. Kadim, on the other hand, would become her companion and accompany her everywhere. He's from a tribe with great vitality, so he will not be easy to subdue. Right now, Schwarlen is searching for the components that will alter Kadim's brain, and the coming full moon will be crucial to the Marquise's plan. While the captive dines, Rosiana carefully dabs ointment over his wounds. Kadim hisses in pain, about to resist, but as if anticipating this, Rosiana calms the boy, explaining that it is a healing ointment. After all, even though everything heals quickly on him, the treatment should not be forgotten. When the treatment is finished and the boy has eaten, Rosiana decides to tell him that on the day the Marquise leaves the estate, she will help him escape. In the evening, Rosiana wanders around the mansion and bumps into one of the maids. When the latter greets the girl, she asks where the Marquise is. The maid informs her that Schwarlen has gone to his chambers to rest after his experiments, so he asked her not to let anyone in. The girl smiles broadly and says that she will greet him in the morning so as not to disturb him unnecessarily. After that, Rosiana turns around and leaves. She remembers that the Marquis has placed an oblivion on everyone living in the mansion. Thanks to him, no one remembers the Marquise's actions. Schwarlen Ibn Haidar is a former paladin and one of the heroes of the War of Empires. He is the main antagonist of the novel, a madman who went about his own desires and therefore studied several forbidden books. Wandering around the mansion, Rosiana remembers that Schwarlen could not deprive her of her memory, although he tried. This leads her to wonder why the Marquise cares for her. The memory of that terrible night comes back to her mind. Rosiana looks interestedly at the ajar door, behind which a frightening red light shines. For some reason, the girl dares to enter the room. Taking one careless step, the child's foot steps on a mangled hand, on which a spider is crawling. Rosiana cries out, recoiling backward and falling to the floor. Of course, as a child, she is very startled by this. Frightening silhouettes and various insects are reaching for her. The girl was so frightened that she was unable to move. Only looking up, Rosiana sees in all this nightmare in reality, Schwarlen, who immediately called out to her. "Why are you awake?" the Marquis asks, and his face and voice are disfigured. It's probably a matter of experimentation, but his right eye is blackened, forming dark spots below the eye itself. Schwarlin informs the girl that it is not proper to enter the room without knocking. The man is clearly angry with the child. Rosiana looked at her father with fear. He reeked of a spirit of death unmatched by any dark spell she knew. "Are you afraid of me?" the man asks, watching his daughter from afar. Rosiana smiles, trying with this action to disguise her own fear, and afterwards she replies that she is not afraid because she recognizes the Marquise in him. Unfortunately, it was a lie. The next morning, Rosiana began to feel feverish and frightened. After that day, Schwarlin stopped hiding what he was doing. There were trophy animal heads on the walls, torture chambers, and laboratories everywhere. All this frightened the girl, and she wondered how long she could pretend that nothing had happened. After that incident, the girl's way of life did not change. But she had managed to get the key to the basement under the pretext of studying. And now that her guard was down, she could help Kadim. It took the girl a long time to gather the tartar mushrooms growing in the basement. After eating these flowers that the mushrooms bloom with after a few days, the victim falls into a dream that is mistaken for reality. At night, the girl sneaks into the cellar and wakes Kadim. She informs him that the Marquise is gone and he should leave soon. In the girl's hands are the boy's clothes and a bag. Already at the exit of the cell, Rosiana notices that Kadim is not in much of a hurry, so she turns around to ask what's wrong. Kadim remains silent, afraid to come out. It takes a little while, but Rosiana finally realizes that it's about security. The girl smiles and informs her that everything is fine. Rosiana holds out her hand towards Kadim, showing the blue flowers from the tartar mushrooms. Noticing more questions in the captive's eyes, the girl explains that she added it to the guards' food so they could get out safely. After the explanation, Rosiana asks about whether he trusts her. Kadim answers with a silent shake of his head. The girl assures him that everything will be all right, but that it is worth it to hurry and get out of here. Once deep in the forest, the children stop. Kadim touches the collar, trying to remove it. Rosiana notices this and offers to help, but the shackles fall apart in his hands. Kadim remains standing still, and the girl asks why he doesn't leave. Kadim remains silent, looking sadly at his companion as she puts a cloak over him to keep him out of sight. Rosiana clarifies if the boy has something to say to her. Without waiting for a response, Rosiana explains that the bag contains food and a map of the empire, as well as giving instructions on how Kadim should proceed and where to go so he can be helped. After looking at the map, Guardia looks up at Rosiana again and shocks her by asking if she will go with him. The girl explains that she wants to go too, but can't do it right now. Afterward, Rosiana smiles and holds out her little finger to the boy. She explains that it will be difficult for him to return to his city, but even after much time has passed, she promises that they will meet again. Kadim is shocked, but promises to wait for the girl after he returns home. At this time, the boy's memory flashes back to how they met. Kadim was shackled, lying on the cold floor in darkness and hunger. The only things that haunted him all this time were pain and the smell of blood. But things got much better with the appearance of Rosiana. The Marquise had brought her, explaining that Kadim was the one who would be her escort. Then he felt love for the first time and realized he could trust her. As soon as the children promise to meet again, Kadim runs away into the depths of the forest. Rosiana breathes out a sigh of relief, realizing that at least she was able to help him. Now all she had to do was buy time for him to run away. The girl looks at the thorny branches of the blackthorns and reaches out to touch them. When Schwarlin returns to the manor, he is met by a servant along with Rosiana. The butler has no time to explain the situation before he is interrupted by the upset girl. Rosiana suddenly cried and began apologizing to the Marquise. Her hands and feet were bandaged. The sight of her adopted daughter crying upset and, at the same time, angered Schwarlin. The servant began to explain that he had found Rosiana unconscious near the tower, but this only made the Marquise more angry. So he grabbed the butler by the collar and threw him aside. These actions frightened Rosiana. She was afraid to move, thinking that she too was about to get hurt. But instead, Schwarlin grabbed the girl's arm and moved closer. It was as if the man wasn't just angry, but also scared. With excitement and anger, the Marquis inquired about who had injured Rosiana. Anger overwhelmed the man, causing him to squeeze his daughter's hand harder than he would have liked. She sobbed, letting him know she was in pain. Schwarlin exhaled, trying to suppress his anger, and gently let go of her hand. Rosiana lowered her gaze in embarrassment, clutching the hem of her dress. She explained that she wanted to give the Marquise a gift. Rosiana pulls out a bunch of flowers and tells him as if Kadim had said he knew about flowers. That's why she opened the door to gather them together, but the prisoner escaped. The girl apologizes again and gives the bouquet to the Marquis, stating that she gathered them for Schwarlen. He, in turn, says that there is nothing wrong with what happened and that he is sorry that Rosiana was injured. As he accepts the bouquet, it is as if the Marquis is pulling the life out of it. You can see the sadness in his eyes. 3 days passed. Rosiana looked at her hands, musing that the wounds had healed and nothing else hurt. The expensive medicines had done their job perfectly. Oh, and the holy water the Marquis used to treat the girl's wounds constantly. Rosiana shuddered, folding her arms across her chest. It seemed to her as if the Marquis wasn't worried, but just wanted to get rid of the scratches on his toy. But she was glad Schwarlen was obsessed with her and not looking for Kadim. Rosiana got out of bed and, after putting on her shoes, headed for the exit of the room, intending to take a walk around the estate. As soon as she opened the door, a maid appeared out of nowhere to inform her that it was not yet mealtime. Rosiana explained that she wanted to take a walk, but the maid was unapproachable, insisting that the Marquis told her to wait for him. The girl agrees. After that night, Schwarlen forbade her to walk even inside the mansion. Looking out the window, the girl remembers that the novel says that the Marquis will soon leave the house. She wonders if she will even be able to leave the house then. 7 years had passed. Marquis still did not allow the girl to leave the estate without him. Rosiana was sitting at a book when from behind the door came the voice of a maid who announced that the food was ready. At the meal, the girl was considering whether to go for a walk today when the maid suddenly asked if she liked her breakfast. At first, the girl didn't notice anything, still thinking about the loss of appetite due to the lack of opportunity to go out. Suddenly, Rosiana was surprised by the question and asked the maid again, to which she replied that she just wanted to know if Rosiana liked everything. The maid smiled sweetly as she watched the girl, but the latter was suddenly worried. The whole thing was that she hadn't interacted like this before, which meant that oblivion had fallen. Rosiana jumped up from her seat. This startled the woman. Something was clearly not as usual. Suddenly, Schwarlen began to take Rosiana out for walks more often, and at some point he disappeared altogether. A few months later, the Marquis' absence was noticed by his cousins. Rumors of his death spread, and a funeral was held without a corpse. Rosiana was standing among the mourners when behind her back the rumors of the girl's kinship with Schwarlen began to be discussed. Rosiana felt uneasy. She could hear everything perfectly well, couldn't she? She really was an orphan. The orphanage where she was known for producing quality products. Every year, the director turned the children over to slave traders. Rosiana was sold at auction at the age of 5 to the Marquis of Schwarlen. Everyone was worried about having to give the role of head of the household to an illegitimate daughter. Except Rosiana. She wasn't even going to fight for that place in the family, especially since she knew that Schwarlen wasn't dead. Right now, the girl was concerned with another matter. She looked around, trying to search for someone with her gaze. "I'm sorry about your father," came from behind the girl, and she was shocked at this sudden start to the conversation. Standing behind her was a young man considerably older than Rosiana herself. They stepped away from the main procession to talk. The man asked what his friend's daughter's name was. Greeting her interlocutor, Rosiana introduces herself and even gives his title and name. She even blushes slightly, respectfully crouching in a curtsy. Cartel informs the girl that she doesn't look like the late Marquis, and afterward that he was actually his best friend. The Duke explains that he was lonely as a child and that greedy hyenas, probably relatives, won't wait around. Rosiana agrees with the man, and this somehow causes a mute question in his eyes. Realizing the unfortunate situation of his best friend's daughter, Duke Cartel offers to help Rosiana. This confused the girl even more. After hesitating for some time with an answer, Rosiana decides to make up her mind and asks Cartel to take her to his mansion. The Marquis's daughter looks rather concerned, realizing that the request sounds extremely shameless. Unfortunately, Duke Cartel looks rather grim after Rosiana's request. He clarifies if there is a good reason for him to take her away. Rosiana realizes perfectly well that she acted rather tactlessly and abruptly, since nothing has happened yet. So she proposes to make a deal, which the Duke is unable to refuse. On a dark evening, a carriage arrives at Duke Cartel's mansion. The Duke himself steps out of it and is immediately greeted by his sister, Evenia Asher. Evenia begins to say that she has heard news of Cartel's trip to the funeral of the Marquise. She is interrupted by the confused voice of Rosiana, who informs the Duke that everything is fine and she can go on her own, to which the Duke reminds her how she tripped. Evenia notices that her brother is holding a 12-year-old girl in his arms. At the mansion, Rosiana and Cartel are met by a butler who greets them. The Duke denotes that it's been a while since they've seen each other and follows up by asking where Rachel and Joshua are. The butler tells them that Rachel left for the academy 2 more weeks ago, and Joshua is practicing. Rosiana remembers at this point that Rachel and Joshua are one of the reasons she had to come to the mansion, as they are both main characters in the original work. As they make their way deeper into the mansion, they encounter the maid Tanya. The Duke informs her that Rosiana will now be living with them and asks her to help with settling in. Tanya nods in agreement and approaches Rosiana, offering to escort her to her new quarters. Later that evening, a conversation takes place between the Duke and his sister regarding Rosiana. Evenia informs him that she did not realize that Cartel was bringing Schwarland's daughter to them. Cartel asks her to keep her voice down, to which his sister exhales dejectedly, rubbing her forehead, and asks what he was thinking when he did such a thing. The Duke explains that if he had left Rosiana, the relatives would have eaten her. The woman did not relent. She reminds her brother that he left both his sons to her and left the mansion, only sending her money. Cartel grows somber as Evenia decides to clarify if the Duke brought Rosiana, because she reminds him of Hestana. All he replies to all of this is a curt, "I'm sorry." The maid carefully states the fact that Rosiana is tired from the road, and hot tea will help keep her warm. Rosiana smiles cordially, thanking the woman for her concern. Tanya holds up a tray of tea, smiling sincerely. She explains that it's not worth a thank you, and the girl can always come to her with questions, or if help is needed. The maid places the tea on the table in front of the girl, and Rosiana asks to talk about the Duke's children. Tanya tells about the straightforward but sweet Rachel. When it comes to Joshua, the maid thinks for a moment and explains that he has a temper and should be careful with him. Rosiana expresses a desire to say hello, but Tanya talks her out of it. It turns out that Joshua won't let anyone near him during training, so Rosiana gets a little upset. She explains that she didn't have friends her age and discretion at the Marquis mansion. That's why Rosiana wanted to meet Joshua. Tanya sympathizes with the girl, who suddenly goes silent after that. A little later, Joshua was still busy practicing, but when he heard a crunch, he turned around. Rosiana was sitting in a tree watching the guy, and as soon as Joshua turned around, she hid behind the trunk, covering her mouth with the palm of her hand. Had he really heard? The girl hoped the guy would pass by. The branch Rosiana was sitting on suddenly snapped, and she fell to the ground. A sword was immediately at her throat. Joshua stared fiercely at the stranger without lowering the sword. He rudely asks who she is. No sooner does Rosiana introduce herself than the guy grabs her by the hair and pulls her, forcing her to her feet. The girl cries out in pain, but Joshua only gets rougher, believing her to be a new servant. Rosiana screams in pain, but when Joshua won't let her go, decides to take matters into her own hands and grabs the guy by the hair as well. The Duke's son threatens and even calls her names. The girl is not going to tolerate the humiliation and replies that Joshua started it first, and she is not a maid at all, because the Duke brought her. Hearing all this, Joshua loosens his grip on her and asks again. Rosiana repeats that she is not a maid and wrestles the boy's hand away. When Joshua's guard is down, Rosiana steps forcefully on his foot and tears away. In doing so, she left the boy bewildered and indignant. Left to himself, Joshua sat down on the ground and frustratedly asked the void, "Is it true that her father brought her?" Rosiana wanders around the castle, feeling hungry because she was very tired yesterday. Suddenly, she bumps into Joshua. The guy suddenly starts talking about last night, raising his voice, but Cartel intervenes, asking what the conversation is about. Suddenly, Joshua embarrassedly informs her that it's idle conversation. He then smiles brightly, delighted by his father's appearance, and greets him. The conversation takes an awkward turn when Joshua says hello twice. The Blans, who are family members, along with Rosiana, sit down to a warm breakfast. Suddenly, Rosiana's fork collided with Joshua's, and he snatched the desired portion of the salad. She held back, mentally reminding herself that even though she'd been reborn, she was still older. Joshua looked unfriendly. He was only nice because his father had returned to the mansion. It made Rosiana wonder how she could befriend him. Suddenly, Cartel spoke up, informing his son that Rosiana was 2 years younger than Joshua himself, and therefore he should take care of her. This irritated the lad, which almost made him sarcastically give out that he would take care of the girl. But holding back, he glowed in a smile, letting his father know that he would do his best. The Duke doesn't react much to this, only continues. He explains that before entering the academy, Rosiana will need a mentor to teach her everything. So he asks that she be taught etiquette. Evnia replies that it's not difficult, so they shouldn't be in a hurry. The Duke says that as soon as he has the guardianship sorted out, he will go straight to the Duchy of Hamel. The Duke's sister worriedly asks if he has figured out how to cure Hastana, but he doesn't answer that. Cartel announces that he will stay in the Duchy of Hamel for a while, which upsets his youngest son. He ends up putting his sister in charge of the estate until his eldest son returns from the academy. In Rosiana's recollection of the deal, she tells the Duke that she can lift the curse on Duchess Hastana. The girl says she knows the truth, to which Cartel rudely asks her to shut up. Duke Blancer is angered by the girl's words and asks about who told her this nonsense. She explains that the Marquise of Schwarlen knew about it. The man says that's what makes him suspicious. When Cartel asks why he would trust the girl, Rosiana explains that she was watching the Marquise from the sidelines, since he specialized in curses. The Duke asks if Rosiana knows what it takes for a former paladin to practice black magic. The girl explains that she realizes that he would be stripped of his title as Marquis, and she could be executed. Rosiana also mentions that she has already told the Duke about it, and therefore is already in danger, and she will find any way to lift the curse from Hastana, just to avoid staying in the family of the Marquise. That's why he agreed to it. Joshua's voice pulls her out of her memories, muttering about her father leaving there again. Hidden rage pours out with a thump of his fist on the table. It scares the girl a little, but he turns around and walks away. Rosiana asks him to stop. Joshua freezes in place and turns around a bit, but Rosiana reaches for his hand, saying that she didn't notice the injury on his hand and it doesn't look like a simple scratch. Joshua yanks his hand away and tells the girl that he doesn't consider her a member of the family, and that when his father leaves, his aunt will be busy all the time and no one will care about Rosiana. When Rosiana tries to tell him something, Joshua turns around and walks away, shouting one last time that the girl should stay away from him if life is still precious to her. Lying in bed at night, the girl thinks about Joshua being a nasty boy for getting so angry. His face was very sad, though. Earlier, Rosiana asked Tanya if she would attend classes with Joshua, to which the maid replied that she could find out. The woman also told her about the new Confucianism teacher that Joshua liked so much. The next day, Rosiana piled up her textbooks, intending to study as much as she could before it came to the main plot. She regretted wasting a lot of time following the Marquis. Wandering down the hallway, Rosiana hears a strange conversation. The teacher was talking about being disappointed, and Joshua should take an example from Rachel.
The silhouettes of the Viscount and Joshua could be seen from behind the ajar door. The tutor was reprimanding his apprentice for being comparable to his brother only in heart, so Joshua was up to the task.
Viscount Portman rudely reminds him that he is disappointed in the apprentice. He sees a mistake in Joshua's notebook and hits him on the arm with a ruler.
When Rosiana sees this, she boils with rage, since Joshua is just a kid. Joshua apologizes and promises to try harder, putting his head down guiltily in his notebook. Suddenly, a magical gust of wind rushes into the library and knocks the teacher to the ground. The cup of hot tea ends up on Portman himself, and he, blushing with shame and anger, informs him that the class is over for the day and they will continue next time. Joshua agrees and walks out. He absolutely heard something, so he decides to take a look around. Looking behind a column, the younger Duke of Blancourt spots a lurking Rosiana and asks her what she is doing here. Rosiana rises, bashfully raising her gaze to Joshua. She notices that the boy is clearly not happy to see her, and immediately wonders why he hasn't said anything to the Viscount. Joshua reminds her that he told her to stay out of his sight, and why does she even care? Before the guy can finish his tirade, Rosiana collapses on top of him. Joshua starts excitedly calling for help, not realizing what happened and how he can help. The girl muttered quietly that she would feel better once she got a good night's sleep. After all, she has been rather weak lately. so she asks him not to scream and to calm down. Joshua is shocked by what is happening, especially when Rosiana asks to be taken to her chambers. In the dream, the girl recalls the original plot when Rosiana saw the Viscount bullying Joshua. A frightened Rosiana turns to the maid to tell her about Portman's behavior regarding Joshua. Reflecting on it, Rosiana realized why she stood up for Joshua. It was all about her choosing a different path, not wanting to be hated. She's different from the real Rosiana. Rosiana wakes up, looking around frightened. This dream scared her every time. Looking around, the girl notices Joshua asleep by her bed. She remembered asking him for help, but didn't expect him to actually help. Rosiana gently pokes her finger in Joshua's hair, thinking that he's only cute when he's asleep, but the rest of the time he looks like an angry puppy. The girl's actions wake Joshua up, and he jumps up, trying to resent something, but Rosiana smiles sweetly. She thanks the guy, since it means a lot that he didn't leave her in the hallway. Joshua starts excitedly explaining that if Cartel found out about this, all sorts of things could happen. That's why he was worried, so he shouldn't see it any other way. Rosiana holds back from cracking the boy when he says that he would never worry about her. The girl asks for Joshua to give her hand, but he even snaps back a little. For a while, they glare at each other in silence. After Rosiana can't stand it and grabs the guy's hand herself, pulling her to her while he is perplexed. The girl takes a beautiful vial of holy water, immediately explaining this to Joshua as well, so he doesn't worry. Rosiana washes both of the boy's hands in the holy water, causing the wounds to heal little by little. Surprisingly, Joshua didn't resent it or yank his palms away. When Ibn Haydar finishes, she has a look of excitement on her face for the boy. He only asks if Rosiana knows how to use magic. The girl answers in the affirmative and asks what the big deal is. Joshua indignantly explains that all living creatures are born with mana, but most can't feel it, let alone control it. It turns out that having magic is a talent. This confuses Rosiana a bit. Next, the guy informs her that it is possible to become powerful when using magic, just as it happened to his brother. Rosiana is a little shocked, as she doesn't feel talented. Rosiana says that Joshua is strong too, since he spends so much time practicing. But the guy fights back, saying that everyone is capable of doing it, and that's all he can do. Joshua is surprised, as Rosiana praises his progress and thinks his efforts are his talent. Memories of being belittled for his lack of aptitude in magic, considered a burden to his father, and reminded that hard work will not defeat talent flash through his mind. Rosiana was studying her textbooks when it suddenly occurred to her that Joshua had changed. There was no resemblance to the original character now. He hadn't become a nerd, though he was still rude. At that moment, Joshua himself walked in. He was embarrassed by Rosiana's stare, and so rudely asked what she was staring at him for. The boy was holding a cookie behind his back, and at Rosiana's questioning look, informed her that he hadn't actually brought the cookie for her, but that he just thought the library was the perfect place for a snack. Rosiana is amused by this behavior from Joshua, and she tries to lighten the mood. She tells him that the library isn't hers, so he can come here more often. While Joshua snacked, Rosiana continued to work on her textbooks. She gently touched her head. The pain still lingered. Suddenly, Joshua turned his attention to what the girl was studying. He pointed to the formula and asked if it was defense magic. Rosiana was very surprised and said that it was great that Joshua knew so much about magic. The guy is a bit rude, explaining that it's a base and the girl is just being silly. Joshua touches the book rather gently when Rosiana asks if he wanted to be a mage instead of a swordsman. The boy explains that his brother does magic, and Joshua's fencing is no match for him. Suddenly, Rosiana rubs Guy's hair, to which he starts to resent it. But Ibn Haydar does not stop, asking him to take his time, because the pace of learning is different for everyone, and his pace is comparable to a way to see other advantages. The girl also suggests that he should become a better swordsman. Blansur replies that this is ridiculous, for he is a child and not fit for such a title. Rosiana is surprised, informing him that it is the effort that counts, not the winning. No one has the right to make fun of people's efforts, after all. Amazed at this wisdom of her interlocutor, the guy pokes her in the mouth with a cookie, telling her to eat it. And when Rosiana mumbles that it's not for her, she notices something unusual. Joshua covers his face with his hand, why the girl decided to ask if he was crying. The guy rudely replied that he's not crying, and in general, she'd better shut up. Rosiana realizes that he is a child with a tender heart who needs help. so she asks to go to the next class with him. Joshua says he doesn't care, even though he refused last time. Rosiana explains that the Viscount is being unfair, but the boy explains that it's because he's not living up to expectations. Suddenly, as if mad, he informs her that only Portman is setting him on the right path. Joshua doesn't even hear Rosiana calling him. When the girl finally shrieks excitedly, however, Joshua asks what he just said. Rosiana looks very scared and worried. At the next class, Portman greets Joshua and asks who is next to him. Rosalind's smile brightens as she introduces herself to the Duke and explains that she has heard that the Viscount is a very good teacher, and therefore she asked the Duke to take lessons with Joshua. The Viscount begins the lesson. He talks about how the Empire is the strongest country, beloved by the god La Mierda. But outside of it, there are people who worship beasts, dragons, and even dangerous monsters. Portman turns to Joshua, asking what he would do if they set foot in the lands of the Empire. Joshua hesitates, and afterward replies that the price for such an act would be their lives, in which case the Empire would be proud of them. The Viscount approves of the answer. Rosiana was shocked. She thought it was utter nonsense. But Joshua was genuinely pleased at the praise. The Viscount notes that a good teacher will not hold back on praise, and afterward rewards Joshua with candy. When the lesson ends, Rosiana asks the boy what the candy is. Joshua explains that they are special candies, as they are sweeter than any fruit in the world. The girl stares intently at the candy in Joshua's hand, and he asks her if she really wants to try it so badly, after which he shares the candy with Rosiana. Rosiana sat at her desk looking at the candy. She was really hoping that it was just regular candy. She needed more for her experiments, so she had to steal them with magic while the Viscount was distracted. Rosiana prepared a mixture of monostone and holy water. She knew that the candies would start to glow if they were enchanted, so she dripped the mixture on the candies and waited. The Duke was sitting at his desk when Rosiana entered his office. She immediately greeted her future guardian and took a seat. Cartel asks about the girl's life at the mansion. She replies that she is quite comfortable. Rosiana also informs him that she continues to look for a way to fulfill what she promised. The Duke is pleased with this and asks how the Viscount's classes are going. Rosiana tells him that it can be difficult, but she listens attentively, and Joshua is very diligent. The Duke confirms this, after which the girl immediately says that the Viscount is not pleased with him. She explains that Portman keeps telling Joshua about his inability to be like his brother, and he gives him candy for correct answers. The girl shows the candy to Duke. Duke takes the candy from Rosiana's hands and takes a closer look at it. Immediately afterward, Cartel got angry and asked who gave the girl them. Rosiana walked out of the Duke's office and exhaled a sigh of relief. She was lucky that she had noticed the oddities right away. The Viscount had fearlessly gotten close to the Duke, and it was necessary to find out who was behind it. Evania was shocked at the news of what had happened. The woman was upset, for if she had cared for the child first and foremost, this would not have happened. The Duke was so furious that he crushed a glass. He informs his sister that he should have spent more time with his son, and he also intends to investigate further to find out more details. These candies give off the odor of a forbidden plant that should have been destroyed long ago. In fact, even an adult's mind will become clouded with prolonged consumption. The Viscount chose Joshua, who is easier to get close to than Rahel, as a target. As he ponders this, the Duke comes to believe that the Empress is behind it all. Evania is puzzled, clarifying if it is the case that he is from the minorities. Cartel explains that the Empress wants to make the first Prince Emperor, which their family doesn't support. But if they make Joshua their puppet, it will turn the tide. The Duke's sister excitedly reports that there is no one among the Emperor's children who would stand up against the first prince, especially since he gave the impression of a pure-hearted man. In response, the Duke reports that he doesn't know if the diary of the Empire is filled with resentments against their family, but no one should touch his family. The Viscount's carriage drove in the late afternoon, while Portman reminisced about the Empress asking for his help, diluting it all with flattery. The Empress had promised the Viscount fame and high position for completing the task, so he had to provide a report. Suddenly the carriage tipped over, frightening and infuriating the Viscount. He jumped out of it, about to scold the coachman. But, the next instant, Portman froze. Before him stood the enraged Duke of Blan. Already in the cell, Cartel in a rage reports that it is even impossible to describe how stupidly behaved Viscount. Portman was beaten and almost cried, trying to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. He apologizes numerous times. A conversation with the Empress pops up in the Viscount's memories. He knows that the Blancourt family has done a lot for the Empire. Therefore, he informs the Empress that he will be killed upon capture. The Empress explains that she is not asking Portman to kill Joshua, only to play on the Duke's carelessness in domestic matters. She promises to protect the Viscount as her man. The Empress holds out the magic stone for the Viscount to swallow. Afterward, she explains that when he thinks of her in danger, the Empress will recognize his situation. In reality, the Duke reprimands the Viscount, perplexed as to how the rot has crept into his family in his absence. Portman has clearly underestimated the Blancourt family. The cartel tortures the prisoner with magic, trying to find out who sent him. The Viscount explains that he was only following orders, so he asks for pity on him. Except, just as Portman is about to reveal who's behind it all, he suddenly dies. The Empress lowered a somber gaze to the stone in her ring. This catches the attention of her attendant. The fellow turns to her, noting that she doesn't look well, so he clarifies what is bothering her. The woman smiles, saying that it's nothing important and it's not worth the worry. At that moment, Sylvia is being called out by children's voices. A couple of children run up to her through the indignant guards. The Empress informs her that everything is fine and they can be let through, as they are only children. The woman sits down in front of the children, asking what happened. A boy mumbles something embarrassed, after which they hand Sylvia the flowers they had collected. The children explain that they were informed that they are only alive because of her, so they wanted to thank her. They also wish good luck to the Empress, to which she smiles and thanks them. Later, in the carriage, Sylvia informs Robert that the children are so innocent. She suggests that it's because of their pure natural mana. She also mutters that she's a little sorry it didn't work out. When the interlocutor interjects, the Empress does not answer, only noting the importance of the impending banquet. She assumes it will be fun. The Duke, along with the children, sat in the guest room. Joshua apologized for not appreciating the Viscount's intentions. He was embarrassed, so he clenched his pant leg in his fist. Cartel informs him that he didn't come to tell him off. In fact, he found it interesting that the Viscount had only recently started giving candy to Joshua, but he had put up with this kind of treatment for so long. Joshua bowed his head guiltily, explaining that he thought Portman was right, because the boy didn't know how to use mana, and he was bad at fencing, but he wanted to become stronger to help his father. The Duke rubs his son's hair, explaining that he is already strong enough. Cartel explains that he is often away from home, so he doesn't have the time to take care of his own son properly. Couldn't even verbally support him. The sudden warmth from his father makes Joshua swallow the lump in his throat. The Duke apologizes for not giving his son the opportunity to be a child. Joshua hugs his father, crying. He was hurt by everything that had happened, but so happy at such kindness, especially from his father. Rosiana watched with a smile. When finally the son and father have made peace, Cartel announces that he will find a new teacher and supervise him. The Duke suggests that they hire 2 teachers to teach separately, but Joshua asks not to do that, since he and Rosiana have supported each other in difficult moments. Joshua's behavior surprises Rosiana, and she turns to him in surprise. When the boy, in his usual manner, asks why she is looking at him like that, the girl says that she also wants to study together. Such cohesion pleases the Duke of Cartel. Suddenly, Rosiana asks for the opportunity to ask a question. After nodding affirmatively, the girl asks if she can study magic. Cartel is surprised by such a question and asks if she really knows how to use mana. Joshua enthusiastically starts to tell his father about how she did it, but Rosiana shuts his mouth. Rosiana says she knows how to use mana a little, so it's a good idea to learn the basics. The boon is enough for the Duke to agree to find a wizard, though it will be after the banquet. At night, Rosiana contemplates the banquet, finding a potion in a drawer. We must prepare for the banquet, she decides firmly, and drinks the potion. Under the influence of the potion, Rosiana becomes much older than her current age. Making her way to the exit of the manor, the girl was visibly tired, so she paused briefly, exhaling. She hadn't realized that she wouldn't be able to use the teleportation scroll in the Duke's manor. The growth potion only lasts for 3 hours, so Rosiana reached the mysterious blue door very quickly. Behind that door was a restaurant. When the waiter approached her, he asked what the girl wanted to order. As the girl studied the menu, She thought about the fact that despite the dilapidated look of the building, the waiter was quite kind and polite to her. Finished with studying the menu, Rosiana asked if the waiter thought that the menu was rather mediocre and she would like something unusual. Something like an elf's tears. The waiter was surprised at first, but nodded with a smile afterward. He indicates that he truly believes that this dish is not on the menu list. Therefore, he asks to wait and excuses himself. In fact, there was a secret guild here providing valuable items and information, but only in exchange for equivalent payment. Rosiana is pulled out of her musings by a foreign voice. Two sleazy-looking men approach her, offering to keep the lonely girl company. One of the men grabs Rosiana's arm and pulls her toward him, telling her that she does not resemble a mage, but rather an aristocrat. The girl begs to be left alone. The men chuckle and decide to explain that weak people have no place here. However, before they could finish the sentence, the bald man is hit on the head by someone. As soon as he started to resent his friend, he too was hit on the head. Thus, there was a conflict between the attackers. Rosiana grinned and a blue earring sparkled in her ear. It went without saying that she had brought an artifact with her for protection. Though the men could see no one, from Rosiana's side everything was perfectly visible, for the ghostly slime could only be seen by the artifact's wielder. And now that slime was beating the men, while Rosiana was watching what was happening, the waiter came back and said that the girl's order was ready, and the chef wanted to meet her. Rosiana hesitated a bit, wondering at the waiter's changed face. And at that moment, one of the men decided to beat up the waiter under the pretext that he interrupted the elders. At this point, he froze in place, unable to move. The waiter immediately explained that their host was against rude people, and afterwards also reminded them of the rumors regarding people causing trouble. Having thus reprimanded the men, the waiter returns his attention to Rosiana. He smiles and offers to follow him. They find themselves on a circular staircase leading downward. The waiter wonders how on earth the girl knew about them. Rosiana feels a little awkward, realizing that she needs to lie, but does so nonetheless, saying that a lady close to her told her about the guild. The waiter turns around, informing her that he understands. But it's weird. And the whole thing is that even the emperor isn't aware of the new password yet. This freaks Rosiana out a bit, but she doesn't give any sign of it. The waiter remarks that someone has leaked the information, but the girl herself is only interested in whether or not her request will be accepted. Absolutely. Your ability to gather information makes you more valuable as a customer, the waiter replies, and lets the girl pass forward, welcoming her to the Shadow Guild. Rosiana finds herself in a dark office. Behind the desk sat an unknown man with a blindfold over his eyes. Approaching the desk, she asks if he minds getting straight to the point. The unknown man informs her that he doesn't mind, because in their guild, the king is first and foremost the client, not the owner. Admittedly, Rosiana was a little scared, because she knew it was a lie. Because if the owner doesn't like the offer, he will immediately reject it, and she knows this because he played a key role in the original story. His name is Jertha Riego. He's the head of the Magic Tower and Archmage of the Eighth Circle, and he runs the guild for fun. From flashbacks of the original story, Belle came to him for help. He already knew that many important people were attracted to Belle, and so he requested her heart as payment. That was what frightened Rosiana. Jertha was unpredictable. Even now he smirks slyly, asking what the visitor can't even get a word in edgewise. Rosiana throws 2 fingers up in the air, explaining that she only needs 2 things. First, she needs ice ore, which is located near the harem tree in Hamel. Jertha informs her that this will be a bit difficult. But Rosiana knows it isn't and voices it. The heir to the Riego family relents and asks if it would not be better to get the fruit of the tree then. The harem tree is a guardian tree. Its fruit is saturated with natural mana and has special powers. The ice ores, on the other hand, are not as strong, but have the power of purification. The girl explains that plucked fruits lose their power, and the ores, in this case, are superior to the fruits. This knowledge surprises Jertha, which he reports. Rosiana is not distracted by this, only asking to make a couple of protective artifacts from these ores, and voicing a second request. She asks to know if the Empress and Portman have ever met. Jertha says he accepts the request, and then asks about payment for his future labors. Rosiana holds out a bundle of tartar mushroom flowers, explaining that this hypnotic flower has a special effect on bad mana, and will help in suppressing monsters. Rigo examines the flowers, noting that it's a pretty good thing, But is that really the end of it? Rosiana immediately replies that she has plenty more, much to Jertha's delight. The girl dumps various artifacts from her pouch onto Jertha's table, explaining that he can take what he wants, but she can't give it all away, alas. This made the waiter standing behind laugh, and Rosiana herself continued. No one knows how to use the flower. Isn't that information enough for payment? Jertha walked over to the girl and kissed the back of her palm, informing her that he had not seen such interesting customers yet, and their deal was done. Rosiana asks to focus on her inquiries without wasting time revealing her identity. The girl assumed that they already realized that she drank the growth potion, especially since Jertha could find her even in a crowd, being monosensitive. The only good news was that they were unlikely to run into each other anywhere else. Jertha is stunned and therefore silent for a while, but when the waiter calls out to him, he apologizes and hands the girl an envelope, promising to deliver the order soon. As Rosiana is about to leave, Noah calls out to her. He places a ring on the girl's index finger, informing her that it can summon the guildmaster once under any circumstances. The waiter smiles sweetly in farewell, inviting the girl to come again. When Jertha and Noah are alone, the latter clarifies whether it's definitely not necessary to send someone to follow the girl. The thing is that only 2 people knew about the password, Jertha and Noah himself. Riego says it's okay. At this time, Jertha transforms himself by removing the shawl from his eyes. He now looks like a teenager Rosiana's age, and replies that it would be very uninteresting if they knew the answer. Rosiana barely has time to run into Duke Cartel's manor before the growth spell evaporates. She exhales tiredly, realizing she barely made it in time. Suddenly, Rosiana was startled, shrieking in surprise. The Duke himself appeared before her eyes and pulled her by the arm, lifting her off the ground. He asks a little worriedly what Rosiana is doing here at this late hour. The girl tries to justify that she wanted to go for a walk, but she herself was well aware that the man would not believe in such silly excuses. To Rosiana's surprise, Blancer offers to take a walk together. Walking around the territory of the mansion, the girl feels awkward, until at some point he asks if she went outside. Rosiana bashfully averted her gaze, and the Duke informs her that he finds her excessive intelligence highly suspicious. He recalls the candy situation, and also remarks that she slipped through the guardsmen unnoticed. This was all a lyrical introduction to the part where the Duke informs her that if she harms his family, he will kill her immediately. Rosalina raises a concerned look to the Duke and explains that although she looks suspicious from the outside, she has no malice towards the Blancourt family. Cartel looks at the girl with understanding. He informs her that he knows about it, and, more surprisingly, he saw the sincerity in her desire to save Hastana and worry for Joshua. The man thanks Rosalind, reasoning that regardless of her ulterior motives, he wanted to thank her personally. The Duke explains that no matter how hard he tried to cure Hastana, he couldn't find the right way, so he decided to stay by her side until her death, forgetting his duties as a father. Rosiana does not have time to say a word. Then Duke Blancer notes that Rosiana has become a mother to Joshua, even though she is still a child herself. Cartel confidently informs the girl that she is now an official member of their family. As long as she bears their family name, he, being the head of the family, will protect the girl and trust her completely. The man holds out his hand to Rosiana, and she finally realizes. His warning at the beginning of the conversation wasn't so much about betrayal as it was about immense trust. Rosiana was shocked by the Duke's words and afterward decided to explain her position. I've seen so many adults who aren't even adults. They have never admitted their mistakes, Rosiana began. She extended her hand to the Duke in response, signifying that he was not on the list of those adults. Not only did he admit he was wrong, he also corrected his mistakes to the best of his ability. Rosiana laughs sweetly, informing him that she is immensely pleased that she met Cartel at the funeral of the Marquis of Schwarlin. A scrap of a long-forgotten memory pops into the girl's mind. The girl brings a smile to the man's face, stating that she will never betray the House of Blancourt, and after the banquet she will tell him everything. Now Rosiana is sure he is the only adult who can be trusted. 10 days later, the banquet was held. The Blancourt family showed up almost in full force, and rumors began to spread among the guests about the Duke's return and about the unknown girl. The door opened, and the Master of Ceremonies announced the arrival of the Empress and the first and second princes. The Empress and the Duke crossed their gazes. Despite the smile on Sylvia's face, Cartel looked displeased. It was immediately clear to those in the know that this was a silent war. Rosiana watched the imperial family with interest, trying to remember who was who. The empress took the first word and thanked those present for attending the banquet, and afterward conveyed her thanks on behalf of the emperor as well.
The woman announces that although today is the first prince's birthday, the second prince will also take part in overcoming the monsters.
Among those gathered, talk entered that he must be excellent in divine power, as the entire imperial family possesses it. The guests were ecstatic at the news. At this moment, the first prince broke his glass and rudely shouted that the guests were too noisy. The next moment, he wounded his brother. Alan mockingly clarified whether it was true that his brother was excellent in strength. It seemed ridiculous to him, since Helios couldn't even heal himself. "It'll be a miracle if he doesn't get eaten by monsters," the first prince exclaimed, as those present froze in a stupor. Rosiana was tense. No one had even called for a healer. It was as if his title of prince was just words. Sylvia, not even holding back a superior smile, informs Alan that you can't say such things about your younger brother. She explains to Helios that the townspeople would feel safer if the second prince joined the monster hunt. At this, Sylvia looks like a most magnanimous woman. Sylvia approaches her youngest son and kisses him on the forehead, wishing him good luck, but she reads fear in Helios's eyes. Pulling away from him, the woman expresses her hopes for everyone to enjoy the banquet. Everyone present was busy pleasing the first prince. Rosiana found it disgusting, but understood why it was happening. Rosiana notices the stares and realizes that their family is not neglected either, for the Duke is still young, though married, and Joshua has no fiancé yet. Yawning, Joshua notices his half-sister's gaze on him and asks if she's still worried. Then the guy mumbles something about sweets helping to ease the anxiety. Suddenly, Joshua scrambles out of his seat and, after explaining that he's about to bring dessert, runs away, even though Rosiana tried to explain that she was fine. While Rosiana is in thought about the original story, she is suddenly approached by Duke Cartel. The man asks his daughter to dance. Extending his hand to Rosiana, he explains that he doesn't like that the event is only for princes, as it is Rosiana's first banquet as well. The girl is a little flustered and is about to accept the invitation to dance when she notices the other prince leaving the ballroom. Rosiana awkwardly informs him that she's a little nervous since it's her first ball and asks to go out to get some air first. Cartel was surprised but agrees, asking only to let her know if she feels ill. Rosiana explains that things are not bad enough to return to the manor, but thanks him for his concern. Afterward, the Duke's daughter runs out of the hall, leaving Cartel in the company of her sister. After the Duke turns to her sister, she coldly apologizes, explaining that she prefers not to dance. Rosiana's strange behavior made the Duke think, but Cartel's musings did not last long, for he was called to say that the Empress had summoned him to speak to her. While waiting for Duke Cartel's arrival, Sylvia enjoyed her wine. As soon as Blan entered, she clarified that the moon was beautiful today, not wanting to start the conversation with trouble. The Empress's eagerness to smooth out the angles, Cartel did not appreciate, asking directly what she needed. The woman grins and walks over to the Duke to adjust the collar of his robes. Cartel is not comfortable with the unnecessary touching of the woman who nearly drove his son insane. So the man roughly wrestles Sylvia's hand away. The Empress was offended by Blansur's action. Therefore, she decided to remind that even during the lifetime of his wife, they had a great time at balls. Next, she will find out if Cartel's feelings have changed. The Duke is clearly angry and therefore speaks to the Empress rudely. The moment clarifies necessarily she needs to know the reason, and especially when Cartel tells her that she stinks. Sylvia was shocked. She had a smile on her face, but underneath it was rage. She makes a rude remark that even the Blanzur family is not allowed to mingle with the imperial family like that. Cartel grows rougher as she warns the Empress of the consequences that will arise from her actions. Such words cause Sylvia to laugh. "This sudden warning, is someone dead?" the woman asked defiantly, realizing that there is no proof of her actions. The Empress runs through her options, recalling Hastana's death and also clarifying that his children are unharmed. But this only makes the Duke angrier, and he has already struck the Empress with magic. Blansur suggests to Sylvia that she remember this moment and is about to leave. At that moment, the Empress reminds him of his offer to work for her, clarifying that it still stands. The woman asks how long he will look back on his deceased wife. After all, with one word from him, she can help him meet Hestana's soul through the power of the imperial family. This speech rekindles the flames of anger in the Duke's chest, and he almost orders the woman to be silent. Realizing that things can only go from bad to worse because of this conversation, Cartel leaves Sylvia. She, on the other hand, is left alone, covered in a blush and laughing slightly crazily. Rosiana ran out into the garden, looking around for the other prince. She was pretty sure he had gone out this way somewhere. Suddenly, a blade was held to Rosiana's throat. The girl was frightened and couldn't move immediately. It was only when she heard the voice of the second prince, asking who she was, that the girl exhaled a little. Stammering, the girl still introduced herself, informing him that she was the adopted daughter of Duke Blancheur. Only when Halas puts his sword back in its scabbard does Rosiana turn to face him and greet him properly, fully introducing herself. Halas asks why the girl was following him and suggests that she had better answer honestly. To add strength to his words, the guy insinuates that there is no one around and no one will notice her murder. Trying to salvage the situation, Rosiana immediately announces that she has a gift for the second prince. She designates that the ball is not only in honor of the first prince, but also in honor of sending Helios off on his military exploits. Rosiana holds out the jewelry that Jertha made earlier from Isor. She informs her that the gift is valuable and hopes the prince will like it. Helios suggests the girl give it to the first prince, assuming she wants to placate the future crown prince. Rosiana worriedly interjects, and afterward explains that she just wanted to do something nice. She especially wanted to give a piece of jewelry with a honey-colored stone similar to Helios's eyes. Rosiana also doesn't forget to mention that Alan isn't worthy of such valuable gifts, since he treats his younger brother so horribly. This surprises Helios, as does the fact that these are valuable artifacts. Rosiana orders 2 identical gifts so that Halas can give one of them to his mother. It's all about the holy magic flowing in her, and even though the emperor didn't like the church, he needed it. Due to the fact that magic only manifests under stressful situations, the emperor locked him and his mother in the tower until the power awakens. He was busy making preparations in case his expectations were not met. Halas' mother fell ill with an incurable disease due to the clash of the emperor's mana and the holy power in her. Therefore, no one expected Hellas to survive, but he did. As Helios is about to leave, the girl asks him to wait and bandages the wound left by his brother. Rosiana replies to the second prince's surprised question that even though she knows about his holy power, she still thought the prince was in pain and the wound was deep. Rosiana smiled sincerely, expressing hope that the pain had at least subsided a little. The girl was worried about Helios not throwing away her gift. After all, in the original story, Bel was the one who could help, but Helios had met her too late. His mother was already dead, so he was cruel to Bel, informing her that if she didn't want to lose anyone else, she was obligated to be with him. Feeling uncomfortable, Rosiana says goodbye, intending to escape the gaze of the second prince as soon as possible. But suddenly, Hellas asks her to wait, holding out his healthy hand to her. The guy reaches out to Rosiana's neck, and light begins to sparkle under his fingers. Turns out he accidentally hurt her when he put his sword to her throat. The magical light healed the wound, and Rosiana was very surprised by such an act of the second prince. At that, she does not forget to thank Hellas for it. To this he replies that the girl can now leave. Left to himself, the second prince removes the bandage that Rosalind had bandaged his wound with. An unpleasant memory immediately comes to mind. Hellas was tearing his eye open the moment his frightened mother called out to him. The boy turned around, and the woman was frightened. When his mother hugs Helios, he informs her that it's repulsive, the fact that his eyes are too much like his father's. The boy smiles madly, explaining that he has the blood of the man who hurt his mother running through his veins. This angers him, and he talks about how it would have been better if he had been killed by his own forces while still a child. The woman cries, trying to explain to her son that she's fine, so he doesn't need to torture himself anymore. As they are about to go to bed, the mother tells her that the boy's eyes are not like his father's, but like the shining dawn in her homeland. They have nothing to do with the evil and cruel ruler. Rosiana did not expect Hellas to heal her wound. She ponders whether the protagonist of the original story has already arrived, looking around. Suddenly the girl heard voices and moved closer, hiding behind a pillar. "You know, my Lady Freya, you have such an unusual hair color," she heard from Amelie, who stood at the head of the crowd of girls. Belle smiled gratefully, answering sincerely that she too had very beautiful hair. Emily thanks the girl for the compliment, but Riley denotes that she meant the color of faded grass. This mockery elicits giggles from Amelie's girlfriends. They start talking about how Belle is a commoner who worked in the fields and lived in the village orphanage. This upset Belle, because the girls were trying to show that they were superior to her. But suddenly, Rosiana appears nearby and takes Belle by the hand, calling her cheerfully. Rosiana informs the girl that her brother is looking for her. This enrages the crowd of maidens who had just entertained themselves by humiliating Lady Freya. Not wanting to answer the girl's question about who she is, Rosiana apologizes and informs them that they have to go. They leave the crowd of maidens standing in bewilderment as they walk away. When they are alone, Rosiana slows her pace and apologizes to Belle, saying she lied. Answering her companion's mute question, the girl explains that she noticed Belle's embarrassment and intervened. Suddenly, Rosiana remembers that she forgot to introduce herself, so she instantly corrects the situation and apologizes. In response, Belle thanks Rosiana for her concern and says her own name. A sincere, grateful smile flashes across the girl's face. From memories of the original story, Rosiana already knows that Belle is kind and intelligent. She was adopted by Duke Freya, and also the world misinterpreted her message and hated her. The girl is destined to become a saint, and Rosiana was hoping for a happy ending for her, but by the end she has lost the fire in her eyes, and the world has collapsed. Apparently, the apocalypse reigned. It is for this reason that Rosiana decides to change not only her storyline, but also the fate of those around her. She wants to at least try to avoid an ending in which the world will be destroyed. In these musings, the girls have already entered the ballroom. Belle ponders whether her brother has arrived, and that he should have headed to the healer upon arrival. While Belle is thinking of her own, Rosiana notices a defeated monster near the first prince. Word has traveled through the hall that Halas never showed himself, all because the throne is reserved for Alan. The second prince sat proudly on the throne. "It was obvious enough," he pronounced, looking arrogantly at his subjects. Just then, Joshua appeared with a pile of sweets, informing his sister that he had already searched for her. At that moment, the defeated monster stirred. The girls stared fearfully at the monster's tail, and Rosiana remembered that in the original, Joshua had saved Belle, realizing afterwards that he could protect himself and his loved ones. But right now, it was Rosiana who was by Belle's side. Things happen too fast when the tail hits the ceiling, causing it to collapse on the girls. When Belle comes to her senses, she finds Rosiana lying next to her with her arm outstretched. The girl cries out, scooting closer to her savior. With the help of magic, Rosiana has managed to hold some of the wreckage above them. This startles Belle, but Rosiana gets her attention by raising her voice and letting her know that she is glad that Lady Freya is unharmed. Belle's face is very worried, because she notices blood on her savior's face. Rosiana chuckles, reassuring the girl that they are both a little hurt, but not to worry because they will be rescued soon. When asked if Belle is hurt, the girl replies that she is fine. After all, Rosiana is more hurt, and therefore it is not for her to worry now. The girl wanted to say something, but her heart suddenly ached. Now she was concentrated only on holding on a little longer until help arrived and not wasting her energy on talking. Suddenly, a light showed behind the wreckage, and Belle cheerfully announced that they were coming up. Behind the wreckage, it became apparent that Joshua and Cartel were working hard to get them out. Joshua smiled, though you could tell by the look on his face that he was nervous. Trying not to give the appearance that he was worried, the guy lets them know that he knew Rosiana was okay. Rosiana smiles through the pain, asking if he used his powers to save them. Joshua is outraged, as it's not something she should be worried about. Rosiana has a strange dream in which there is a girl very similar to Belle. She tells her that she has been waiting for Rosiana, to which she reciprocates. The dream is suddenly interrupted, and the girl wakes up. The first to notice this is the worried Duke. After Rosiana moves her gaze to the edge of the bed, noticing her older brother sleeping there, the Duke carefully asks his daughter to rest some more. The girl asks how long she slept, to which Cartel more relievedly informs her that she has slept for almost a week. This surprises Rosiana, as it is the first time she has ever been asleep. Suddenly, the Duke begins to glare at his daughter, which makes Rosiana feel uncomfortable. When asked if he has anything to say, the elder Blancer says he will call a healer. The man walks over to his son and takes him in his arms. He explains that they will talk after Rosiana has fully recovered. Holding his sleeping son in his arms, the Duke tells him that Joshua was very worried and did not sleep well, waiting for the girl to awaken. Already on his way out, the man thanks Rosiana for waking up. 2 weeks later, during breakfast, Rosiana asks Joshua, "Don't I radiate energy?" She felt fine. Joshua grudgingly clarified if she wanted to say she was fully recovered, which the girl confirms. Rosiana explains that she was examined several times a day by a healer, fed 3 times a day with meat, vegetables, and expensive medicines. And all this for 2 weeks. She was even allowed to walk. Belle wasn't even allowed to see her before. Once Rosiana was better, Freya was allowed to stay at the Blancourt mansion for a week. She took care of Rosiana the whole time. Joshua was displeased with his sister's behavior. When did they even have time to be friends? When the guy informs her that they'll still have time to see each other, Rosiana resists because they need to show Belle that she's healthy. Joshua grumbles, but suddenly shoves dessert into his sister's mouth, telling her that Cartel would like to talk to her a little later. At one point, Joshua clarifies that he doesn't think Rosiana might have made an inconvenience. He also explains that it wasn't the girl's fault, and she realizes that her brother has grown up. Joshua is outraged because he's already older than his sister, and now he's also revealed his abilities. He has a very embarrassed look, and Rosiana notes that he looks like a puppy. Suddenly, Rosiana thanks Joshua, but not just thanking him, but adding a soft brother, which makes him more embarrassed. At sunset, Rosiana and Duke Cartel meet for a cup of tea. The father of the family informs them that he had a lot of things to do, and that's why he rarely came. He also inquires about Rosiana's health. Rosiana tells him with a smile that everything is fine and nothing hurts. The Duke agrees thoughtfully, noting that the wound on her forehead has long since healed, but he was concerned that she hadn't recovered for a week. Blanzer suspects that Rosiana may know the reason for her unconsciousness, as Joshua has told him that it happened once when she used magic. Cartel explains that he won't be able to help if something happens because of a misunderstanding between them. He also reveals that he was genuinely worried that his daughter would never wake up again. Rosiana guiltily lowers her head, explaining that she is new here and doesn't want to cause trouble over such a small thing. When the Duke gloomily interjects, the girl hurries to say that she is fine. The Duke asks about whether Rosiana knows why she faints after using magic. The girl replies that the symptoms appeared a long time ago, but she doesn't know the reason for them. Cartel tells her that the mage who examined her noticed a crack in Rosiana's mana source because she is still a child and uses more mana than she can. The Duke explains that mana is both soul and life force. Therefore, using it could be dangerous for Rosiana. With this in mind, he again puts his adopted daughter in the position of choosing whether to study magic or not. Rosiana thanks her father for his concern, but explains that she needs it. Cartel clarifies that if it's about Heston, it's not worth Rosiana's life, no matter how much he wants to break the curse. Rosiana smiles, explaining that she offered the deal herself, and yes, that's not the only reason. She reminds him that she promised to talk to the Duke after the ball. The girl places a hand on her shoulder and tells him that the Marquis has placed a mind control seal on her. The girl also tells her story. Rosiana apologizes for the deception. She explains that Schwerlin is still alive, and the seal that didn't disappear was proof. She goes on to tell about the scrolls with information about the divine shards. Cartel clarifies if they are about legendary shrines, which Rosiana confirms. She tells of one of the 8 crystals, the location of which is already known to Schwerlin. According to legend, this crystal will lift the curse on Histana, but the problem is that it might not succeed, and then the situation will get worse. Rosiana apologizes for only telling everything now, but the Duke explains that it's not her fault. This surprises the girl, but Cartel explains that it was his greed that led to these consequences. Rosiana concludes the conversation by saying that she could hurt her family if she doesn't remove the mark, and she doesn't want that. The Duke is surprised, but Rosiana already knows how to destroy the brand before the Marquis returns and tells him of her plan. A few days later, the Blancourt family finds themselves in the woods. The Duke was shielding the children from a monster surrounded by a black haze. At first, the monster just growled, but very soon it rushed to attack. As soon as it was almost close to Rosiana, a wolf pounced on it, whose bite made the monster disappear. Rosiana stared at the wolf for a while, and then still approached. She gently touched its muzzle, and, when the animal moved to meet her, began to stroke it. Rosiana was very pleased, noticing aloud that it was indeed her old friend. After these words, the wolf's guise evaporated, and before her sat the now grown-up Kadim. The Blancer family, along with Kadim, approached a lonely cabin in the forest and stopped. Joshua grudgingly asked why they had stopped. Kadim explained that his teacher was not fond of meeting people. This angered Joshua, for he did not understand why he had brought them here. Kadim didn't answer, but Rosiana excitedly informed him that she absolutely had to meet his teacher. So she asked to at least ask the teacher about the possibility of talking to him. Kadim asks to wait at the entrance, but before he can even move, the doors open and a worried teacher comes out. Asel approached Rosiana, intending to ask something, but the Duke stepped between them. He was worried about his daughter, and, realizing this, the mage invited them inside. Kadim poured tea for Joshua and the Duke of Cartel. It was evident from Joshua's own face that Kadim was not to his liking. Distracted by Asil's apprentice, Joshua asks his father excitedly if Rosiana will be safe alone with the mage. The Duke does not answer, absorbed in his memories. During their conversation, Rosiana expresses her desire to visit the gloomy forest. She explains that a powerful magician lives there and that he can free people from spells. Although the Duke expresses his misgivings about this trip, Rosiana explains that this is the only chance and only the first step needed for the second. Rosiana calls the second step enrollment in the academy, where she will continue to study, as well as search for shrines and a way to break Hastana's curse. Asel talks about how Kadim has told her a lot about her, and then asks directly about how the girl knew where he lives, since even experienced mages don't know his whereabouts. Lustarif pulls out a note from a drawer that Kadim had brought him as soon as he showed up here. The note contained the following: I know you are looking for the key to the world tree. The mage has been puzzled all this time as to how the stranger would know this. Rosiana first of all introduces herself and greets Asil in the most officious manner. The girl tells him that she has seen a terrible future and points out that this is why the mage is looking for the key to the world tree, because he himself senses the split that will start it all. Asil looks worried, noting that Rosiana not only knows his whereabouts, but also the reason he chose his current location. Rosiana tells him that this forest is filled with guardian spirits, but because of the rift, monsters are appearing to destroy them, and evil forces are luring people into the forest. Asil explains that he settled here to guard the world tree and assumed Rosiana needed help since she told him about the future. The magician informs her that he is amazed by the girl's knowledge, but he is not ready to trust her so easily. So Rosiana gladly agrees to the mana test. Asil apologizes, penetrating into the depths of the girl's subconscious. Suddenly, he injures his hand during the mana test, and Rosiana expresses her concern. The magician informs her that everything is fine and, more importantly, that the girl was telling the truth, so he is ready to listen to her request. Later, Rosiana says goodbye to the Duke and Joshua. She explains that she will have to study magic for the 3 years until the academy, even though she has very little time left. Joshua is upset that he won't be able to see his sister for so long. Rosiana explains that they're not saying goodbye forever, and she'll be writing letters to her brother. The boy wipes his tears with his hand, asking her to stop and take care of herself, because even if she doesn't learn magic, he will become stronger and protect her so that the events at the ball don't happen again. Rosiana smiles sweetly and rubs Joshua's hair, thanking him and calling him brother one last time. 3 years passed. Rosiana has been practicing magic, but miscalculates her strength and starts to fall as Kadim picks her up from behind. He recalls that the teacher said to practice for no more than 5 hours. The next morning, Asil was packing Kadim and Rosiana for the road. She tells them that she took everything she needed with her, including the magic supplies that the teacher recommended. The teacher also hands the girl various recovery potions, food warming scrolls, and is about to cram something else in, but he is interrupted by Kadim. He explains to Asil that Rosiana can't take all that ballast with her, to which the teacher is indignant. Rosiana supports her friend, explaining that she can't carry everything. The mage speaks sadly about how quickly her 3 years of training have flown by, and also expresses his desire to enter the academy, to which Rosiana cools his ardor by reminding him that he is not allowed to leave the forest for long. A concerned Asil tells her that she can call on him at any time if she needs help and asks Kadim to take care of her. After all, he is more concerned about his students than the forest. After saying goodbye to the teacher, Rosiana and Kadim headed to the academy. The boy was carrying the suitcases, and Rosiana offered her help, to which her friend replied that there was no need. Rosiana decides to find out why Kadim decided to join the academy. She knew that he did not like to be in society, but what she was most interested in was the question of his return to his homeland. Kadim explains that he is entering the academy of his own volition, and also he has no attachment to home for a very long time, and therefore he will be able to go there later. Suddenly, Kadim turns to Rosiana and asks her if she doesn't want to study with him. The girl denies her friend's assumption and explains that she is only happy to have them around. Lucarian Academy is an educational institution for those with a thirst for knowledge, regardless of social status. It is a sovereign territory, and there is a lot to learn here. The boys agree to take their things to their rooms and meet at the central building. Finished, Rosiana walked over to the lists of trainees to study them. Rosiana was called out by a familiar voice, and she turned around, greeting Belle. The girl says that she was told about Rosiana being in the sanitarium all this time, and wonders if she is better. Belle also points out her chaperone and reminds her that this is her older brother. The guy introduces himself as Roxian Freya, and afterward immediately thanks Rosiana for the girl saving his sister 3 years ago. Rosiana bows a bit, explaining that there's no need for thanks, and she's pleased to finally meet Roxian. But Belle's brother was a bit speechless, and Rosiana mentally picked up on the general awkwardness. Rosiana was pulled out of her awkwardness by the voice of her older brother approaching them. The girl mentally marvels at how Joshua has grown and changed. The boy rubs his sister's hair, reprimanding her for not having heard from her in over 10 days. Rosiana makes the excuse that they did meet today, after all. When Rosiana remarks aloud that he has grown a lot, her brother is indignant. But is that really all she wants to say? He was expecting something along the lines of, "I missed you, little brother." Joshua chuckles, grateful for that, and noting that Rosiana hasn't stayed small either. Suddenly, Rosiana drifts off into thinking that she has almost met everyone, but neither Kadim nor Joshua has shown any interest towards Belle. Moreover, Joshua didn't even remember Belle by sight, and even when Rosiana reminded him that the girl had come to visit her, the boy didn't react in any way, turning the topic back to the academy. Joshua went on to say that the grounds couldn't be seen in a day, and then clarified that the freshman ceremony was coming up. So the older brother rubbed Rosiana's hair, bidding her a warm farewell. The freshman ceremony began. The vice principal stood in front of the students and welcomed the new students, and afterward introduced himself as Lutra Kobel. Rosiana reflected on the fact that there were only 3 main characters left who had not yet met Belle: Halaus, Jurtha, and Rachel. At that moment, the vice principal announces the arrival of the academy's student representative and freshman curator, Rachel Blancer. Seeing Rahel, the girl was surprised. The whole thing was that he wasn't supposed to show up at the academy yet. In the original, Rahel had graduated long ago and returned to prepare to inherit the Blancer house. At that very moment, that's when the world crack should have appeared. That's when he would receive the god's blessing, and, under the emperor's orders, head to the academy to train students and search for the one that would receive the power of the goddess. However, Rachel will not change her principles, and the good of mankind will be above all for him, so he will unite with the goddess to save mankind. But it's too soon for him to return to the academy. Is it really all about the Duke not going to Hamel? Belle and Rahel's love was the purest, but he hurt her in other ways. In trying to protect Belle, the guy came between her and the monster, sacrificing himself. The thing is, she could protect herself as well. What's more, he could protect himself as well. In fact, he was deathly tired of the endless chaos and battles. Rachel had been the first to give up and stop fighting. Rosiana was pulled out of her thoughts by Belle, who called out to her at length. The girl noted that Rosiana had darkened back in the main hall. The girl chuckles awkwardly and apologizes to Belle, and afterwards she asks again what the conversation was about. Lady Freya asks what dormitory Rosiana lives in, and it turns out they share a room. Belle expresses her joy, to which Rosiana asks her to address each other by their first names, as they are all equals here, so it is better to drop the formalities. Belle is a little embarrassed, saying that she is glad they are living together, and then expresses the hope that their life together will be fun. Rosiana reciprocates. The boys are gathered around a table in the academy courtyard. Rosiana mentally rejoiced at the calm around her as Kadim put a strawberry to her mouth for a treat. Rosiana was surprised, asking where he got the strawberries from in the first place, to which the boy replied that his teacher bought them. Suddenly, Joshua was outraged, for how could she just eat from someone else's hands like that? This surprised Rosiana, and she asked, "What's the big deal?" Joshua was amazed that his sister did not understand trivial things. But the girl calmly reminded him that he also fed her tasty things. They were friends. Couldn't friends also feed each other? Joshua was a little embarrassed, agreeing with his sister, but suddenly Kadim crushed a strawberry. This caused Rosiana to misunderstand, and she asked what was wrong. Kadim said that he himself didn't realize how it happened. To this, Rosiana offered to wipe his hand. Suddenly, Joshua exclaimed that his sister's friend was his friend, so he would take care of Kadim himself and wipe his hand. As Joshua wiped the guy's hand, all he could think about was that he was a pissy brat. Belle spoke up. She wondered what course Rosiana had chosen, because she was thinking about a course on nature and life. Joshua suddenly interjected, saying that he thought the course was stupid, because the teacher, in a bad mood, might not read the papers at all, but just use them to stoke the stove. Belle almost ignores Joshua's insertion and goes straight to Rosiana to ask her opinion. The girl replies that she likes herbalism and medicine. At this point, Joshua intervenes again, asking what could possibly be useful about growing herbs at all, to which Belle again glares at him for a while. Rosiana suddenly shoves a strawberry into her brother's mouth, asking him to stop. Afterward, the girl turns to Belle, wondering about her attitude towards alchemy and herbalism. Belle explains that commoners have a hard time getting treatment due to lack of funds for expensive medicines, and so she wants to research herbs that are easy to find and make affordable remedies. Rosiana shows words of encouragement to her friend and afterward expresses her desire to enroll in the same courses with her so that they can support and help each other. Suddenly, Rachel walks up to their table and greets his younger brother. He denotes that they haven't seen each other in a while and wants to say something else, but Joshua interrupts him. The guy explains to Rachel that he hasn't yet met Rosiana, who was adopted by the Duke a long time ago. At this point, Rosiana was sitting with her head down, as if fearing execution. Suddenly, Kadim stood between them. This surprised Rahel. The boy asked about what he was doing. Rosiana enters the conversation, noting that she forgot the course list in her room and therefore needs to return. The girl suggests that the others chat, and Rachel doesn't have time to stop her. The next day, a lecture on the theory of magic. Rosiana listened attentively to the teacher, while Belle had a hard time concentrating. After all, her thoughts were occupied with yesterday's conversation with her friend. That evening in their room, Belle brought up what had happened between Rosiana and Rahel. The reason the girl suspected it was because Rosiana had run off somewhere as soon as he arrived. Rosiana laughed awkwardly, explaining her escape by her sudden deterioration in health. She also apologized for making everyone worry. Observing Rosiana now, Belle concludes that her friend is feeling better. This pleases her, though her face seems a bit worried. After the lecture, the girls discussed the fact that the lesson wasn't as difficult as it was supposed to be. Suddenly, they found a crowd of students. Rosiana saw the beaten freshmen and was very surprised, asking what happened here and why the freshmen were unconscious. Suddenly, someone calls Joshua's name, and the girl turns around. She sees her older brother, who exhales a little tiredly. Turning her head in the opposite direction, Rosiana sees a slightly battered Kadim slammed into the wall. As he rises, Joshua asks why he's still on his feet. He doesn't want to give up, does he? Rosiana was glad her brother was stronger, but still yells at Joshua, asking why he's bullying the freshman. Her brother was happy to see her, because he could show her how tough he had become. Rosiana repeated her question, to which Joshua confusedly said he wasn't fighting with them. He wants to say something else, but is interrupted by Kadim, who explains that they are the ones who asked him to fight them. Rosiana worriedly interjects, moving closer, and Kadim explains that they wanted to test their strength against an experienced swordsman, all because the instructors are unfamiliar with the techniques of knights. The girl expresses her concern by reporting that Kadim's cheek is swollen. In doing so, she ignored her brother's question, asking Kadim, "Do you really want to become a knight?" At those words, Kadim hurriedly left, throwing in a parting remark that lunch was coming soon and he needed to change. During lunch, the boys sat around the four of them. When Rosiana ran out of strawberries, all three of them handed her their portions. The girl was surprised and asked if they all didn't like strawberries. Joshua replied that he had had enough of them, while Belle preferred fruit. Rosiana held out a strawberry for her friend to sample. Seeing this, Joshua became indignant, saying he wouldn't mind some berries either. When Rosiana promised to treat him too, they were suddenly interrupted by Rachel, who asked to sit next to them. For a while they all dined in awkwardness over the arrival of the Blanchours' eldest son. Rosiana mentally resented the fact that, instead of one of the available tables, the boy had chosen their table. When Rosiana started picking at her plate because of the awkwardness, Kadim noticed it. He said that the girl didn't have to torture herself if she was already full. He must have noticed something wrong, so he got up from the table, suggesting that Rosiana leave, as she still had classes to attend. The girl happily agrees and offers her friend to go with them. Belle also agrees. The first time Rosiana avoided Rahel by turning sharply in the hallway. The second time, she helped a stranger to escape, and several more times after that. Rosiana is sure Rahel has already noticed that her sister doesn't want to cross paths with him. At Magic Seals practice, the instructor reminds them that they've learned how to draw a simple defense seal. He introduces Rahel as a practice helper for today's lesson. The teacher points to the board on which the seal is drawn. He asks them to redraw it on their worksheets, and then to use it to defend themselves against the attack of the fundrake vines, mentioning that its blows are painful. The fundrake is a magical plant that annoys everyone with its jokes. Its specialty is its fast vines that regrow anew if cut off. Rosiana is repeating the seal from the blackboard in her notebook when Rachel suddenly approaches her and offers to help. Hearing her brother's voice, the girl speeds up as much as possible, unwilling to cooperate. The girl jumps up abruptly from her seat, announcing that she has already finished, and clarifies that now it is necessary to get in line. Rachel doesn't even have time to reply, as her sister runs off to join the queue in a flash. One of the students had already approached the fundraiser. He was excited, or rather frightened, and therefore gulped. At that moment, dozens of vines rushed towards him. The guy thrust his seal leaf forward against the plant's attack, shouting for it to defend itself. But alas, in the next moment, the apprentice was suspended high in the air by those vines. While Rachel cuts off the vines and catches the student, the teacher tells him that he had transferred the seal to his notebook incorrectly and asks him to pay attention to a specific part. The student thanks Rahel, and the teacher tells him that it is time for the next student to get ready. At this point, Rosiana comes out. She was a little nervous, even though she has seen seals like this many times before. Rosiana holds out her seal leaf against the plant, thinking about how annoying the fundrake's grin is. The teacher watches Rosiana. He knows that everyone has the same seals drawn, but if not enough mana is put in when using it, the spell may not work. One of the vines grabs the girl's leg and she falls. At that moment, Rachel chopped the liana off. The teacher reports that the girl did fine, but lost concentration during the transfer of the seal. Blancer notices that her sister has hurt her knee and offers to take her to a healer. When Rosiana abruptly refuses, the boy informs her that he will carry her on his back. To Rosiana's dismay, the doctor was not there, so it was Rahel who had to treat her sister's abrasion. When he was done, the girl warned him that she was on her way. This angered Rachel, and he asked her directly why she was avoiding him. His brother explained that even Joshua had told him off, believing that Rachel had offended Rosiana. He even elaborates that this is the first time he has seen his brother like this. Rachel explains that her behavior is obvious even to those around her, and afterwards asks him what he could have done to offend the girl, to which she replies that it's not that. In fact, the girl remembers that in the original, it was Rachel who killed Rosiana. And she remembers that hurt distinctly for some reason. What happened in the original was that Rosiana pressed on Rahel's guilt for killing her own brother. She pressed in every way possible that it should have been done in the first place. Rosiana lowered her head sadly, sinking into these thoughts. But suddenly, Rahel's attention was caught again, talking about the fact that Duke Cartel had said a lot of things about her. The boy signifies that it is a long time since he has seen such happiness on the faces of his father and brother as he did when they were talking about her. He is glad of this change, for if he had not, his brother would have gone mad and his father would have stayed in Hummel. Rachel thanks Rosiana from the bottom of her heart and tells him that he has returned to the academy to help and protect his sister, so he immediately promises to come to her aid at any moment.